Hello everyone. Tonight we're going to dig into one of the weirdest, most uncomfortable, and strangely hilarious truths from our prehistoric past. Picture this. You're standing on the edge of a windswept plain, maybe 8,000 years ago. You've got your spear, your mammoth hide belt, your weirdly itchy fur leggings, and you think life is hard because the fire keeps going out. But the real danger, it's not the wild animals or the freezing wind, it's your genes. Because there's a very real chance you're not going to make it. Not in a you got eaten by a saber-toothed tiger kind of way, but in the evolutionary sense. You, sir, are not going to pass on your DNA. Why? Because somehow, back in those dim, distant days, something truly bizarre happened. Almost all the men disappeared. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Tell me what you think of this mess. Do you believe it? Do you have theories? Or maybe you just want to know if your ancient grandpa was one of the lucky ones. Whatever it is, drop it in the comments. And if you want me to dig into the Neanderthal dating scene or what cavemen really thought of romance, I'm open to suggestions. By the way, if you've ever wondered why guys still insist on grunting at barbecues or competing over who can build the biggest bonfire, yeah, that's caveman brain. We haven't changed that much. So let's talk extinction. You're walking across a field of stone and dry grass. You smell wood smoke. Somewhere, a baby cries. You're holding a crude stone axe and wondering how to tell your group's women you caught a fish this big. You're stretching your arms really wide right now. But what you don't realize is this. Genetically, your chances of having descendants are terrible. We're not just saying, oh, life was hard for everyone. No, something uniquely bad happened to men. Let's fast forward to what scientists discovered thousands of years later in a fluorescent-lit lab using saliva samples and shiny machines. Geneticists analyzing human DNA made a startling discovery. While mitochondrial DNA passed down from mothers to children showed a steady line of female ancestors, the Y chromosome passed only from father to son told a completely different story. Around 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, something happened. Y chromosomal diversity collapsed. Dramatically. It's as if 90% of men just vanished from the reproductive tree. The Y chromosome was being passed down by only a tiny handful of guys, while women's lineages continued as usual. One rough estimate? For every 17 women who had children, there was just one man who did. One! That's not a dating app, it's a survival game with horrifying odds. You might be thinking, okay, but maybe they just didn't have sons. Nope. We're talking entire male lines dying off. No sons, no grandsons, not even third cousins. It's not that the men themselves dropped dead in a single battle or plague, though that probably happened too, but that only a minuscule portion of the male population got to reproduce. Which, evolutionarily speaking, is the same as disappearing. So what caused this genetic apocalypse? It wasn't aliens, though that would make a great Netflix series. The best guess? Something shifted in human society around that time. This is right after agriculture kicked off, after people started forming clans, villages, early chiefdoms. That shift meant power became centralized. And when you centralize power, something else gets concentrated too. Access to women. In other words, the guys who had power also had harems. Not metaphorical ones, literal groups of women they controlled and reproduced with. If you were the big man in the village, you didn't just get the choicest meat, you got the future. Everyone else got celibacy and probably chores. You can almost hear it now. Hey man, you're not part of the chief's family, are you? Nope. Then back of the line, and go clean the yak dung off the roof. It gets worse. Archaeologists digging up graves from this era found a pattern. Rich burials, often male, filled with weapons, jewelry, animal bones, and signs of polygamy. Meanwhile, poorer male graves? Few, far between, and lonely. You can practically hear the "forever alone" meme playing softly over the dirt. Now, historians are still debating whether this collapse happened due to organized warfare, young men killing each other for dominance, epidemic disease, some illness that targeted male populations, or extreme sexual selection, women only choosing a small elite. Maybe it was all of the above. But one thing is crystal clear. Something wiped out male genetic diversity on a shocking scale, and it wasn't happening to women. Their genetic lines kept flowing. The prehistoric ladies? thriving. The dudes? Oof. Here's an odd twist, because I promised you one weird fact per episode. In some parts of the world, especially in modern Iceland, you can still trace nearly every living male back to a single founding male line from the Viking era. That's how powerful these bottlenecks are. One lucky guy makes it through and boom, you get a whole country of descendants. And just in case you're wondering if this means you're secretly descended from a prehistoric alpha male, maybe. But more likely, you're descended from the one dude who didn't pick a fight and just helped around camp. The guy who figured out how to fix shoes or make good soup. Don't underestimate the power of soup. It's easy to imagine the moment. You're standing around the fire, trying to impress someone with your hunting story. But the women aren't impressed. One of them glances at you, then leans toward her sister and whispers, "He's got no goats. And he smells like old bear." That's it. Your genes just died. But don't feel bad. You're not alone. Nearly every man back then lost the same game. Part 2. You're sitting on a flat rock sharpening your spearhead, but your eyes keep darting to the other men. You're not worried about the wolves or the rain. You're worried about the guy on the left, the one with the crooked nose and too many scars, because he's been looking at you funny ever since the mammoth hunt went south. He blames you. And around here, blame doesn't mean someone posts a passive-aggressive cave painting about you. It means someone dies. Prehistoric life wasn't some peaceful kumbaya drum circle where everyone shared berries and firewood. Nope. This was Survivor. Clan edition. And alliances were everything. Archaeological evidence from burial mounds in Central Asia and parts of Europe tells a brutal story. Mass graves, blunt force trauma, blades lodged in rib cages. These weren't the marks of random accidents. These were signs of coordinated violence. Clan versus clan. Brother versus brother. You think it's bad that modern men fight over parking spots? Try living in a world where the best real estate was a warm cave, and the only way to claim it was with a rock to someone's head. Here's the thing, they weren't fighting just for food, they were fighting for mates. That's right, the original Battle of the Sexes involved actual battles. You see a woman you like? You better hope she likes you back and that her brothers don't hate your guts. Because in many cases, the only way a man could gain status, and thus attract a mate, was by proving he could protect, provide, and crush the other guy's skull, if necessary. Not exactly a great environment for sensitive poetry or healthy emotional expression. There's a phrase floating around in academic debate circles, patrilineal competition. It sounds fancy, but it basically means a bunch of guys fighting to make sure their kids, and only their kids, inherit land, status, or the good spear. The flip side? The losers don't reproduce. At all. So when people say men are more aggressive than women, yeah, some of that is testosterone. But some of it? Straight up natural selection. The nice guys literally didn't finish. They got finished. And if you think that's hyperbole, chew on this. At some prehistoric battle sites, only the women and children were spared. Entire groups of males, teenagers, elders, toddlers gone. Wiped out. One particularly grim site in Germany had dozens of male skeletons, all showing signs of violent death. The women? Taken. The men? Erased. It's enough to make you think twice about trying to flirt with the girl from the neighboring clan. So now imagine you're back in the village, standing by the fire. The chief is glaring at you because you took too long fetching water. The other young men are eyeing your necklace, the one made of polished bone, and wondering if it would look better on them. You're outnumbered, underfed, and completely replaceable. Welcome to the prehistoric power game. But it wasn't all spears and bloodshed. Some of the most intense competition happened in weird, passive-aggressive ways. Like gifts. One man brings the best antelope meat. Another brings rare shells from the coast. Another tells a joke that actually makes the women laugh. Suddenly, there's tension. Who's the favorite? Who's gaining influence? Who's about to be invited on a dangerous hunting trip and never return? And just like in modern politics, alliances shifted constantly. A guy might be your hunting buddy one day and your accidental murderer the next. Prehistoric backstabbing? Very literal. Odd fact break. Did you know chimpanzees, our closest cousins, also have male coalitions that rise to power through scheming and alliances? Researchers watched one chimp essentially campaign like a politician, grooming the right allies, avoiding fights until the moment was right. Then boom, alpha status. So if you ever feel like workplace drama is just primal nonsense, you're absolutely right. We've been doing this a long time. Back to you and your spear. You're starting to notice that the bigger, stronger guys aren't necessarily doing better. The loudest guy got exiled last week. The quiet one who fixes tools? Still here. So maybe strength isn't everything. Maybe survival isn't about dominance, it's about knowing when to back down, who to flatter, and how to disappear when two men start yelling about whose goat wandered off. Historians are still debating whether these prehistoric conflicts were random bursts of violence or organized social pressure to prune certain male lines. But the result was the same. Only a tiny sliver of men got to be ancestors. And remember, this isn't about you dying. It's about your bloodline quietly ending because someone else brought better meat to the fire and didn't sneeze during the elders' ritual. You may have lived to 40, had great stories, but if nobody picked you to be dad, evolution doesn't care. That's the tragedy and comedy of it. You could be amazing, kind, resourceful, and still vanish from the human story because your rival had better hair. So the next time you hear someone bragging about how tough they are, just remember, prehistoric success wasn't just about toughness. It was about timing, alliances, and luck, and a deeply unfair system where 90% of men never got to play the game twice. Still feeling cocky about your survival chances? Didn't think so. Part 3. You're sitting in a hut made of woven reeds and mud, chewing on roasted tubers, and it hits you don't really know who your father is. And weirdly, nobody seems to care. That's because you're in a society where lineage doesn't follow the father, it follows the mother. Welcome to the world of matrilineal kinship, a world where your uncle is more important than your dad, and your sisters might decide who lives, who marries, and who gets kicked out of the village. And guess what? Archaeological digs across parts of ancient China, the Americas, and even Africa suggest this kind of system wasn't some fringe arrangement. It was normal for thousands of years. Grave goods, living arrangements, and DNA patterns hint at households where women lived with their brothers, not their husbands. The men who stayed with them weren't romantic partners, they were siblings. You visit your partner's hut by night and leave before breakfast. No Sunday pancakes, no Father's Day. Why? Because in a world where paternity was, let's say, uncertain, it made more sense to invest in the child you knew was family, your sister's kids, not those maybe mine children across the village. And since women stuck together, forming dense social networks, they could collectively raise kids, maintain land, and control inheritance. Meanwhile, you, the wandering male, were often on the outside looking in. You might say, hey, that's not fair. And sure, it stings. But from a purely survival standpoint, this made brutal sense. Women were the consistent factor in early social groups. Men were, well, kind of replaceable. And when things got tight, food, space, or patience, it wasn't always the women who got shown the door. Imagine this scene. You're carving a bowl, sweating under the sun, and you hear laughter from inside the longhouse. It's your sister and your mother. They're discussing who your cousin should marry. You pop your head in. What about me? You ask. They glance over and keep talking. Translation: you don't get a vote. And that's not all. Anthropologists studying ancient burial sites found something odd. Women were buried close to their families, with elaborate items, jewelry, ceramics, tokens of status. Men, often buried alone or far from home, sometimes with weapons, sure, but very little else. It's as if the society said, thanks for your service. Please exit through the gift shop. Public academic debate is still ongoing about just how widespread matrilineal systems were. Some argue they were common only in peaceful farming communities. Others think they were far more prevalent, even in supposedly patriarchal cultures. What everyone agrees on, though, is that when women had control over lineage and inheritance, it fundamentally reshaped male roles. In short, your value wasn't based on what you were. It was based on what the women decided you brought to the table. And if they didn't like you, there's a hut near the river with your name on it. Enjoy the frogs. Here's your odd fact for the episode. Among the Moso people in modern-day China, sometimes called the Kingdom of Women, there are no husbands. Relationships are walking marriages. The man visits, leaves before sunrise, and has zero role in raising the child. The maternal uncle is the father figure. So yes, there are still echoes of prehistoric matrilineal life alive today. Back in our imaginary past, you're trying to figure out your place in the village. The women are repairing nets. The children swarm around their mothers. The men, mostly doing side quests, hunting, fetching water, building fences that get knocked down during storms. You're the muscle, not the core. You don't build the house. You crash there. If you're lucky, you try to make yourself useful. You bring the juiciest berries. You offer to babysit. You carve a nice bone comb for your partner's mother. But deep down, you feel it the truth that this isn't your tribe. You're here on borrowed presence. Your survival? Tied not to dominance or strength, but to approval. Let's be honest, that sounds terrifying, right? But it also might be the only reason you're alive. Think about it. Men were dying off, left and right, in war, accidents, and risky hunts. Embedding yourself in a matrilineal structure gave you a better shot. Instead of being the alpha, you became the ally, the helper, the guy who shows up with extra firewood and never forgets birthdays. There's strength in submission, safety in softness. And maybe, just maybe, the guys who embraced that role, they were the ones whose genes made it through. And yet, not everyone made the cut. Some men were expelled, ghosted by the clan, or quietly ignored. Rejected not because they were violent, but because they couldn't adapt to the social rhythm, couldn't contribute meaningfully, couldn't bond. You know that awkward guy who always showed up late and forgot people's names? In prehistoric times, he didn't just get left out of the group photo, he got left out of the gene pool. So here's your lesson of the day. If you're stuck in a matrilineal society, don't challenge the auntie council. Compliment their pottery, laugh at their jokes, and never interrupt a weaving session. Because behind every successful man in prehistory was a sister who let him sleep near the fire. Part 4. You're leaning against a sun-baked rock, staring out over the scrubland, wondering why the sky looks so empty, and then it hits you. It's not the sky that's empty, it's the male bloodlines. Gone. Vanished. Erased from the human story like they never existed. And it's not a metaphor. We're talking about the actual, physical disappearance of Y chromosomes, the tiny but crucial strand of DNA passed from father to son. Around 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, something happened that scientists still can't fully explain. Y chromosomal diversity collapsed like a flint house in a thunderstorm. The rest of the human genome? Still pretty diverse. But the Y? It got bottlenecked tighter than your old mammoth hide pants. Let's break this down in caveman terms. Imagine a village with 100 women and 100 men. By the time your descendants are telling stories around campfires made of IKEA furniture, only a few of those men will have passed on their Y chromosomes. The rest? Poof. Evolutionary dead ends. Historians are still debating whether this mass male vanishing act was caused by brutal warfare, rapid social shifts, disease outbreaks, or, let's be honest, because the ladies just weren't feeling it. Some scientists propose that in the early days of agriculture, as communities grew in size and complexity, men started forming larger coalitions. These coalitions went to war, not just pushing and shoving over who gets the bigger hut. We're talking raids, conquests, forced assimilation. When one clan overtook another, they didn't just burn the grain stores. They wiped out the men and absorbed the women into their own lineages. We know this because burial sites from Neolithic and Bronze Age Europe tell a very specific story. You get graves with mixed origins, women from one group, men from another. But the Y chromosomes? Uniform, same lineage, over and over again. Like only one guy and his cousins got to do all the fathering. So yes, it's possible that coordinated violence wasn't just a hobby, it was a strategy. Odd fact break. Did you know there's a guy named Genghis Khan who may have fathered more than 1,000 children, and that nearly 1 inch 200 men today might be his descendant? That's not an ego trip. That's an example of what happens when one lineage gains massive reproductive dominance. It's called the Genghis effect. And while his story's medieval, the prehistoric version probably looked similar, minus the horses and elaborate hats. But what if it wasn't violence? What if men disappeared simply because women stopped choosing them? Another theory suggests that during this period, women became more selective. With food more stable and settlements forming, women had more power to choose mates. No longer forced into pairings for pure survival, they could now prioritize traits like intelligence, social cooperation, or even kindness. Men who couldn't adapt, they were passed over. Let's say you're standing in the village square. You're decent looking. You've got strong arms and a decent collection of seashell beads. But you're kind of abrasive. You interrupt the elder during story time. You hoard berries. You don't pull your weight when it comes to babysitting. Next thing you know, you're not invited to the mating dance. You're not asked to carve the family totem. You're not even in the maybe pile. Just like that, your entire genetic line gets filed under "not today" evolution. One wrong social move, and your ancestors become someone else's story. Here's what's wild. The Y chromosome doesn't just shrink quietly. It broadcasts its extinction. Geneticists today can track these patterns, and when they look at ancient samples, the missing male lines are like eerie empty slots in the family tree. It's like showing up to a class reunion and realizing your whole branch of the family forgot to RSVP. Forever. And remember, this didn't happen once. The same pattern shows up on multiple continents. Asia, Europe, Africa, different times, different cultures, same result. Most men didn't make it. Or at least, their Y chromosomes didn't. Which brings us to a rather existential question. If you're not reproducing, are you really surviving? Prehistoric humans didn't have Instagram followers or LinkedIn profiles. Their legacy was blood. If your children didn't thrive and your sons didn't have sons, you didn't just lose status. You became a whisper. A genetic maybe. A name carved in no one's memory. You start to see how fragile male legacy was. You could be a great hunter, a skilled carver, a guy who invented fire-roasted turnips. But if the mating dance didn't go your way, sorry, Grog. History forgot you. And then there's the issue of replacement. For women, it was about continuity, passing on traditions, foods, knowledge. For men, it was about survival of the line. And that made things tense. There's an ancient saying, probably mumbled by a caveman while fixing a broken trap. When times get hard, men disappear. Okay, I made that up. But it's emotionally accurate. Imagine lying on your back, staring at the stars, wondering if your children will remember you or if someone else will raise them and get all the credit. That's not just a modern fear. That's a prehistoric epidemic. So now you're starting to see the picture, right? That ancient emptiness in the Y chromosome? That's not just a quirk of biology. It's the echo of 1,000 crushed dreams, 1,000,000 unspoken rejection speeches, and countless men who looked around and thought, wait, where did everyone go? Spoiler alert, they didn't go. They just didn't get picked. Part 5. You're trying your best. You've got the jawline. You've got the antelope hide with the fashionable shoulder tear. You even figured out how to start a fire without setting your hair on fire. But still no one's picking you. Not for food gathering, not for mating, not even for group storytelling. Welcome to prehistoric dating, where being average is a one-way ticket to genetic irrelevance. Let's talk about prehistoric hypergamy. A fancy word for what your ancestors knew all too well. Women generally preferred to mate up. And up didn't just mean strength. It meant status, charisma, alliances, reputation, and maybe the ability to make babies stop crying. You're standing at the edge of the village circle, watching as one man juggles berries for a group of giggling women. Another is showing off his new obsidian blade, and there's you holding a slightly bruised yam and trying to look mysterious. Not working. See, prehistoric women weren't just picking mates at random. They were filtering, curating, refining the next generation. And in a world where raising kids was life or death, they had every reason to be picky. The wrong choice could mean weak offspring, no food, or social shame. The right choice? Safety, support, and a better chance at survival. This wasn't just survival of the fittest. It was survival of the fittest to impress. Here's what the evidence says. Genetic data from modern humans reveals that a vastly disproportionate number of men did not pass on their genes, while most women did. In one widely studied example, as human populations expanded post-agriculture, about 80% of women had children, but only around 40% of men. That's a massive reproductive gap. Imagine showing up to a party where every woman gets a dance, but half the men end up standing alone by the mammoth meatballs. Historians are still debating whether hypergamy was a universal pattern or more intense in certain societies, but the implications are clear. If you weren't in the top tier, you probably weren't in any tier. Odd fact interlude. The Maasai of East Africa have long practiced a form of prestige-based polygyny. A wealthy warrior might have 10 or more wives, while others have none. That might sound like a lot to manage until you remember there were prehistoric guys who couldn't even manage to say hello without tripping over their own tunic. And it's not just about looks or muscles. Charisma mattered. So did storytelling, singing, being the funny one, being the one who helped with the fire without being asked. Women didn't just want a provider, they wanted someone who could stay alive, cooperate, and maybe, just maybe, not be a total jerk. So now you're back in the camp, sitting near the fire, watching as the chosen men get the attention, the flattery, and yes, the access. You're trying to signal value by arranging stones in a circle that kind of looks like a buffalo, but mostly just looks sad. The competition wasn't just brutal, it was psychological. And the real kicker? You weren't competing against all men. Just the top 10%, over and over again. Which meant your odds didn't just shrink, they imploded. It was like an eternal talent show. But only one act ever got to take home the trophy. And you weren't even on the stage. You were adjusting the torchlight. And don't get too comfortable thinking this ended in the Stone Age. Modern data shows eerily similar trends. A small portion of men father, a disproportionate number of children even today. In some societies, elite men with wealth, fame, or status have more children, while countless others leave no genetic trace. It's the same playbook, different costumes. You might say, well, why didn't men just flip the script? Why didn't they take control? And the truth is, sometimes they did. Patriarchal systems did rise. But long before kings and crowns, evolution was writing a much quieter story. One where women shaped the gene pool more than anyone wanted to admit. It's funny, isn't it? You spend all that time learning to hunt, build, and grunt impressively, and then it turns out the key to survival is knowing how to listen, share, and help Auntie Muna with her water jug. That's the thing prehistoric men learned the hard way. Dominance might win battles, but cooperation won hearts. And hearts, not wars, wrote the next generation. Picture this. You're finally invited to a feast. The music is someone clapping bones together. The dancing is mostly stomping. But it's your chance. You compliment the elders' cooking. You carve a little doll for the children. You listen to someone's story all the way to the end. And for once, someone smiles at you. A real smile. You might not have the best genes, but you've got presence. And in this unforgiving lottery of life, sometimes that was enough. So don't just sharpen your spear, sharpen your jokes, sharpen your empathy. Because in the prehistoric world, the strongest man often died alone. The clever one? He got invited back for leftovers. Part 6. You're crouched by the fire, balancing a half-roasted mushroom on a stick, and you can hear it again, the baby's crying. Not yours, but someone's. And you're the only adult nearby. So you do what your genes have learned over thousands of years to do. You hum a little tune, rock them gently, and offer a piece of honeycomb. Congratulations. You just outcompeted half the other men in your gene pool. Because here's the not-so-macho secret of survival. Prehistoric men didn't win by being the strongest. They won by being the most useful, the most adaptable, the most emotionally intelligent. They won by knowing when to shut up, when to help out, and when to not pick a fight over a burnt root vegetable. This is what we call the evolutionary lottery, and it didn't reward who you'd expect. The guys with the best abs? They froze to death in the mountains showing them off. The ones with the flashiest weapons? Killed in the first raid. The ones who sang lullabies and helped braid hair? Still here. Their genes? Thriving. Archaeological sites from the Neolithic period show fascinating evidence of this shift. As communities became more complex farming, herding, building settlements, so did the social roles. Tools got more sophisticated, domestic tasks diversified, and so did the kinds of traits people valued in mates. Men buried with children's toys, weaving tools, or cooking implements weren't mocked. They were respected. Because they kept the group going. Historians are still debating whether this shift was a gradual move towards social balance or a sudden break from dominance-based cultures. But the evidence is mounting. Prehistoric survival became more about contribution than conquest. That's not to say warriors disappeared, but they didn't automatically get to reproduce. Meanwhile, the guy who knew when to hold the baby and when to shut up during Auntie's storytelling, very attractive. Here's your odd fact for this round. In some early agricultural communities, men were buried with cosmetic kits, yes, prehistoric makeup, ochre for skin, polished bone for mirrors. You think your caveman ancestors didn't care about looking good? They invented contouring before TikTok did. So there you are leaning into your new survival strategy. You've got empathy, you've got timing, you've got a surprisingly solid falsetto. And while the other guys are arguing over whose spear is longer, you're helping gather herbs with the elders and getting noticed. Still think evolution was all about biceps? Let's not forget that in tight-knit communities, likability was survival. You annoyed the wrong person, and suddenly nobody shared meat with you. You didn't pull your weight during planting season? Say goodbye to your spot near the warmest part of the fire. Reputation wasn't a status symbol. It was your lifeline. And once again, the math doesn't lie. Genetic studies show that just a small fraction of ancient males actually reproduced, and those who did? Many were genetically related to each other, suggesting that social selection, not brute dominance, filtered who made it. But don't mistake nice guy for doormat. The prehistoric male winner wasn't spineless. He just wasn't a moron. He knew when to challenge, when to negotiate, and when to shut his trap and listen to the old stories again. Yes, even if he'd heard the one about the dancing bear 6 times already. You may not have been born into the alpha bloodline. You may not own a cave with a skylight. But you can sing a baby to sleep. You can gut a fish without drama. And you know better than to correct the elder mid-ritual. That's the trifecta. And here's the kicker. These traits didn't just help individuals survive, they made entire villages more cohesive. They helped raise stronger children, forge tighter alliances, and smooth over conflict without unnecessary spear wounds. In other words, the rise of emotionally intelligent, socially skilled men wasn't just good for them, it was good for everyone. Picture it, the sun is setting, the fire crackles. Someone plays a tune on a hollow reed, you pass around roasted tubers. Laughter, stories, even a flirtatious glance. You're not the loudest, not the biggest, but you're there, and you're welcome. That is winning. It's ironic, isn't it? In modern times, we often imagine cavemen as grunting, violent brutes. But the ones who made it, they were probably more Mr. Rogers than Mad Max. So the next time someone says, survival of the fittest, you might want to ask, fit for what exactly? Turns out, being fit to connect was more important than being fit to conquer. So maybe you didn't win the mammoth hunt, but you built the drying rack that kept the meat from rotting. Maybe you weren't the alpha, but you knew how to calm down a panicked toddler during a thunderstorm. And somewhere, somehow, one woman noticed and thought, that one, him. Congratulations, you just won the prehistoric evolutionary lottery. Part 7. You're standing on a windswept hillside, bone knife in hand, watching your child take their first wobbly steps toward the fire circle. You glance around. The others are watching too, not just with pride, but with recognition. You made it. Against the odds, your line lives on. You're not extinct. You're an ancestor. Let's zoom out. Thousands of years later, modern scientists stare at genome data from around the world, and what do they find? That nearly all men alive today descend from a very small group of prehistoric males. Seriously, just a handful. Your great-great-great times 500. Grandfather was one of the lucky few who slid through that evolutionary bottleneck like a smooth rock through wet clay. It's like walking into a party of billions and realizing 90% of the guys are wearing the same genetic cologne. That's not coincidence. That's survival by filter. Brutal, slow, and astonishing. The ancient world didn't almost erase men. It did, over and over again. But a few always squeak through. Not always the strongest, the richest, or the loudest. Sometimes, just the guy who figured out how to make a net, remembered every child's name, or told stories that made people feel safe after a hard rain. And from those few, a new world. Archaeological evidence shows a slow but clear shift in burial styles, settlement design, and community roles during and after the bottleneck periods. More shared graves, more uniform goods. The suggestion isn't just population regrowth, but social restructuring. After the crash, people adapted, men adapted. You had to. Because survival wasn't about dominance anymore. It was about compatibility. Odd fact to chew on before we close. There's a region in Cameroon where a majority of men share almost the exact same Y chromosome marker, tracing back to a single man around 2,000 years ago. A literal human echo. If you think your ancestry is unique, think again. We are the children of very narrow chances. And here's the weird part. All of this almost didn't happen. One more war, one more famine, one more shift in climate or cultural practice, and boom. No you, no me, no dad jokes, no people trying to sell bone-flavored protein powder on TikTok. That tiny group of males who survived, they passed through a bottleneck narrower than a mammoth's nostril. And yet, through them, modern man emerged. Not just taller or stronger, but more flexible, more collaborative, less likely to throw rocks when someone disagreed. Of course, the pressure never truly stopped. We still see echoes of those prehistoric patterns today. Status obsession, social competition, awkward flexing at the gym. Yes, gentlemen, it's not just testosterone, it's ancient trauma. Your DNA remembers a time when if you didn't stand out, you vanished. But let's not forget the hopeful part. Standing out changed. It stopped being about who could hoard the most power and started being about who could contribute the most meaningfully. It started being about the dad who carried the baby and knew how to find honey without getting stung. And slowly, the world shifted. So now you're back by the fire, the same one your ancestors sat beside. You've got children running around, elders telling stories, and someone is roasting a lizard that honestly smells a little overcooked. You smile. You made it. Your Y chromosome thread, the thinnest line in human history, wasn't cut. You survived. Not just the hunt, not just the drought, but the far more terrifying challenge: social selection. You weren't picked off. You were picked up. And that's how we got from prehistoric near extinction to today's global dominance. Not through sheer force, but through adaptability, humor, patience, and whatever that thing was where you learned to make people feel like you actually cared. You were never the strongest, but somehow you were just right. And for that, welcome to the future. You made it. Not just through a 7-part podcast, but through the wildest genetic lottery of all time. Because somewhere, deep in prehistory, men nearly vanished. They were cut down by warfare, erased by social structure, filtered by female choice, and crushed under the weight of survival. But a few made it. And you? You're living proof. That's worth slowing down for. So let's take a moment to appreciate what we don't have to deal with anymore. You're not being judged by how many goats you own. You're not sleeping outside because someone found your berry haul unimpressive. You have antibiotics. You have tacos. And for better or worse, you don't have to impress the village matriarch just to be allowed near the fire. Today, survival means something different. It's not about dominance. It's about connection, compassion, creativity. That prehistoric toolkit we developed when being chosen meant everything, it's still in us. And we get to choose how to use it. So hug your friends, tell stories, learn to cook something, be useful, be kind. And when things get tough, remember, your ancestors survived worse, much worse. And they did it not because they were the biggest or the boldest, but because they adapted. And hey, next time someone calls you sensitive, you can say, thanks. My entire bloodline survived because of that. Good night, time traveler.